Are you looking to expand your aesthetic practice and attract high-quality new patients? Discover the power of digital marketing in growing your practice with a personalized strategy session. Schedule your meeting today by visiting www.businessofesthetics.org/MSM and take the first step towards transforming your practice with the potential of digital marketing.
You're invited to join our exclusive monthly webinar brought to you by the Business of Aesthetics community. Don't let this chance slip through your fingers. Secure your spot now for a game-changing experience. Register for free on our homepage at www.businessofesthetics.org and get set to transform your strategies.
Welcome to another episode of the Business of Aesthetics podcast, brought to you by our gold sponsors, Equa Marketing. Today, we're excited to welcome Michael Walker. Let's dive into his insights and experiences.
Welcome to another segment of the Business of Aesthetics podcast. I'm Michael Walker, your host for this episode. Before we get started, I want to thank all of our incredible listeners from around the United States and across the globe. We couldn't do this without your continuous support. A special thank you also goes out to our sponsors for this episode, Equa Marketing. Nearly 20 years of experience, Equa Marketing is a leader in digital marketing services for aesthetic practices. They're offering our listeners a complimentary digital marketing consultation, which will include a tailor-made 12-month digital strategy for your practice. You can just head over to www.businessofesthetics.org/MSM to book your consultation, and I'll have more on that at the end of the podcast. But without further delay, let's dive into our topic for today, the art and science of rhinoplasty. Joining us today is Dr. David Cangello. Great to have you with us today, Doctor.
Thanks for having me, Michael. It's great to be with you.
Yeah, we're excited about the topic and having you on board. We know that you have quite a very strong reputation following in your industry, and let me just share a little bit of your background with our listeners.
Yeah, please.
Dr. Cangello is a world-class board-certified plastic surgeon practicing in New York City. He is expertly trained in plastic and reconstructive surgery and specializes in rhinoplasty, but offers a full range of cosmetic plastic surgery. Dr. Cangello received his medical degree from SUNY Upstate Medical University at Syracuse and has established himself as a leading New York City plastic surgeon whose exquisite results have made him nationally known. That's kind of easy to see, Doctor, when you've been featured in so many different magazines from InStyle, Elle, Bravo, Bazaar, People, 17, and the New York Magazine as well. And I know that you are listed in the top doctors in the Castle Connolly survey, which is an incredible honor and I'm sure well deserved.
Thank you.
I also noted that you have like over 8,700 followers on Instagram. And I know that once people have a look at that, they're going to look you up, and then they look up your website, which we'll refer to at the end, but at cangelloplasticsurgery.com. They're going to see these incredible before and after pictures, and just, wow, it's just amazing what you do. So hats off to you, but let's go ahead and jump into the questions we put together for today. And let me lead off with just a little overview of what I saw, looking into you a little bit and understanding the title we have, The Art and Science of Rhinoplasty. And what I see is that you have a beautiful blend of passion for art and technical application to help people be the best version of themselves, inside and out. I like how you describe your approach, performing each procedure using artistic insight and surgical precision, and utilizing that quote from Michelangelo, "I saw the angel in the marble and carved until I set him free." That's just beautiful. It just allows such a holistic view of something that could be very clinical and very probably intimidating and scary for folks. And you just seem to have a beautiful way of taking that fear out of play and introducing something that's such a powerful tool, both inside and out for people. So the first question I've got to lead off with, is, what was the genesis of your passion for surgery and specifically plastic surgery?
That's such a great question. You know, I initially became interested to be a surgeon when I was a kid. I grew up in upstate New York, and a very sort of rural area. And I remember being in ninth grade and I was taking a zoology class, and we were dissecting these animals. It was my first time ever doing this in a science class, dissecting animals that are native to upstate New York. And it was interesting because from the time I was young, I knew I wanted to be a surgeon. And, having the animal on the table before me and starting the dissection, there was something about me and the way I approached it that it was just meticulous. Like everybody else in the class, we're 15 years old and kids are joking and laughing and that kind of thing. And for me, I took it so seriously right from the get-go. And the first time, I made an incision and started the dissection, I said, someday I want to do this on human beings, because I just knew it was, first of all, I found it super interesting. It's such an important thing. And I think that, having always been such a perfectionist and such an artist, I wanted to do it in the most meticulous way I possibly could, and of course, when you're 15, you don't really know what a surgeon does in the operating room, but you can sort of imagine that, things have to be done very meticulously and that kind of thing. And that's the way I felt about it. And so literally from that point on, I said to myself, I'm going to be a surgeon one day. And, sure enough, that's what happened.
I remember that biology class. You and I weren't in the same class, but I was one of the other ones.
Yeah. They were laughing.
Actually, I wasn't laughing. I remember, I can actually remember, I was so concerned that it might not be dead.
Yeah.
I was really anxious, but I was trying to, how do we know for sure? How do we know? And that kind of, anyway, that reflects how I function with any kind of living thing, just that the power of life, so thank you for that. We're talking about the art and science of rhinoplasty, and you've spurred that title on with just how you utilize this idea of the artistic insight and surgical precision. So would you share with us how you embrace and engage the art and science of rhinoplasty in your practice?
Yeah, so it's such a great question specifically for me, just because it applies to me so much. So the other part of growing up, I was always interested in art. I mean, I started drawing from the time I was, I don't know, probably 7, 8 years old. And it's interesting because I have 2 young daughters now. I'm in my 50s. I have 2 young daughters, and certainly at least the first one I think has received some of those artistic genes because she's an incredible artist. But, I started drawing and sketching, and, I think that artists kind of see things differently, right? Like you see art that's sort of more contemporary and, abstract, things like that. I was always the type of artist from the time I was a kid where everything was sort of hyper realistic. I don't know if you've ever seen hyper realistic drawings where you can sketch with a pencil or charcoal and make, for example, a face or a part of a face literally look like it was a photograph, because the amount of detail that you put in there down to the millimeters actually makes the drawing of charcoal look like an actual photograph. And so that was just innate in me, and that's how I started drawing when I was an actual child. And my mother, who was a nurse, she had said to me, she had seen a lot of my drawings and said, maybe you'll be a medical artist one day, that kind of thing. And which was kind of surprising because I knew she wanted me to be a doctor, but I think she was just commenting on the artistry. And so for me, that's always, again, it's that meticulous nature. It's that highly detailed, focusing on all the little details. And it really, really comes into play specifically with rhinoplasty, because one of the things you may not know, but it's commonly accepted in the plastic surgeon community that rhinoplasty is considered the hardest operation in cosmetic surgery. And the reason for that is because really what you're doing is you're taking a structure of cartilage and bone, which of course is underneath the skin, and you have to manipulate that in such a way that once you cover it back over, now you have a beautiful result, right? So it's not kind of like, it's not direct, it's indirect, because you're changing something and then you've got to cover it up with skin and have it look a certain way. And so I've just always had that personality that's wanted everything to sort of be perfect, look perfect, that kind of thing. And the fact that I think this is the most challenging operation, it was what I wanted to take on and sort of be the best at, you know what I mean? And so when I feel like I can use, and I do use, my artistic sensibilities, and I think what makes a beautiful, beautiful nose in the end is when you do take that time and you look at all of the details and you do things so precisely, and you end up with something beautiful in the end. So that's kind of how I've married the two things together. I think
That's really
the
cool.
best
I can see
plastic surgeons are artists, you know what I mean? Not to say you can't be good without being an artist, but certainly it does translate into the profession, that's for sure.
Yeah, it sounds to me though, it's not just simply, art as a science, it's the ability to go up and see the big picture in the context of what you're working on.
It
Like you
is.
say, beautiful
It
face.
is. It is. And I think, obviously, so medicine is the science, of course, but if I'm being honest, I mean, there's not a lot of science involved in rhinoplasty, and that's kind of what's unique, I think, about this particular operation, because it's a super artistic operation. Yes, there are functional aspects to it. Of course, we breathe through the nose, and so you have to understand the anatomy on the inside and make sure that things are done properly so that you have a functional nose, and that would be sort of the medical scientific aspect of it. But you're not really applying scientific principles when you're really performing a sculpture is what you're doing, and that's the art of rhinoplasty. So
Now hence the Michelangelo quote.
that's right. It's funny, my wife's a cardiologist, and she loves Michelangelo, and she actually turned me on to that phrase when we were building the website. She's like, you have to include that. And of course I thought it was perfect. So that's what we did.
Gorgeous.
Yeah.
So in your house, if I'm out for a walk with you and your wife and I have a heart attack fall on my face, I'm in good hands, right?
You're in good hands.
And that side of how, as you say, the art of it and how your bedside manner would be the term I would think of in the very nature of what you do, the ability to get someone to trust you enough to dismantle their face and put it back together and to do that. And then to have this result as I say, when I look at the website, looking at some of these changes, like, man, that's amazing. You can, and I was just reading a little bit on just the challenges of when you start to use anesthetic and stuff, and how it swells things and suddenly alters shapes that you're working on. You don't really know right in real time whether you've got it or not. You have to trust your instincts and training, I guess. But the idea of that, but there's got the outcome of that and people and their reaction. And I'm curious, I know you can't share about specific patients or like stories that would reveal people, but just kind of maybe if you could share some of the kind of the comments you get on results and how it's not just changed people from the inside in terms of how they look, but on the outside, how they feel about themselves.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think that sort of the biggest, without any specific story, I think one of the biggest things that I see, Michael, is, you'll have people come into the office at their initial consultation, and a lot of people have been so insecure about their nose because it's literally, of course, the center of the face, right? And I think unless you've experienced it, having a nose that you don't like, it's hard to understand exactly what these people are thinking. But the amount of insecurity that comes with typically the situation is having a very large nose, right? I mean, there's all different kinds of noses, but I think that's one that tends to lead to a lot of insecurity. And you see people come in, and they come in sort of a shell of themselves. I mean, like very quiet, not very talkative. Sometimes maybe even seeming a little bit like they're sort of not interested almost. But I think that, if you're sort of in tune with the psychology of what you're really seeing, it's insecurity, and we all have insecurities. I mean, there's none of us that doesn't have an insecurity and doesn't know what it feels like to be unhappy with a part of themselves. And sometimes that translates into, how we come across, of course, in our relationships and people we're dealing with. So it's interesting because, a lot of times I see people, especially younger people, starting this way. And then, you have the operation, and the best part for me, it honestly never gets old. And even my staff, because I'll always have, whether it's my office manager or a nurse or something in the room with me when we take the cast off, 7 days after the operation, we take the cast off. And the look on somebody's face, the smile, the tears, the hugs, it's like, it literally makes me want to tear up right now just thinking about it. But it just never gets old, I mean, that's why I do it, because to be able to impart that sort of joy to somebody and give them that sense of security that I think that they've been missing for a long time. I mean, there's just no better feeling than that.
Wow, that's powerful. Yeah, I can imagine. I can identify with it at some level, but unless you've actually been there, as you say, with a feature that just leaves you insecure and
That's
feeling
right.
different. I think that whole idea of just their insecurities is such a big deal with in growing up, but have some. A lot of your patients are probably older and or coming to a little older.
And think about that. I mean, so if someone who's older is coming to me, because I tend to ask that question a lot too. I mean, I'll see people in their mid-40s, and I always say to them, so what brings you to doing this at this point in your life? And almost invariably the answer is, I've wanted it my whole life, and of course there are certain circumstances and things that, sometimes if it's a woman, it's, I was having kids and I didn't have time for myself and I finally do, that kind of thing, or if it's a man, maybe it's financial, whatever the case may be. But there's always a reason why people couldn't do it. But if you're doing it when you're that age, it's something you've carried with you for a long time. It doesn't just come upon you at 46 that it's time to make a change to my nose. You know what I mean? So yeah, it's a real thing.
Yeah, it's the old the wound and vow. There was a wound that was created by how they saw themselves, and they vowed to not do or do something, but suddenly they made a shift and said, I'm going to deal with that. I do as a leadership coach and mediator. I'm pretty good at profiling people for good reasons, to just best understand where people are at that are in a conversation with me.
Mhm.
And it's often, I can sense where the brokenness is and sense where there is something that's not that they're struggling with. And it's, in my case, it's not usually, it is usually something internal, a wound in the bowel, something, fear of something perhaps, but in your case, it's an outward expression. It's just beautiful. You get an opportunity to step into that gap.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I am not a leadership coach, but I'm very in tune psychologically. I've just always been that way. And oddly enough, when I was younger, I thought about being a psychologist just because I find it fascinating. And as I say, I've always been sort of very in tune. And so, I see those same things. And in fact, you had mentioned earlier, the bedside manner aspect of this. And, I think that I see that in people. Like, I'm very in tune with how they're feeling, and I have that sensitivity where, number one, I want them to feel like they're understood, because it's a hard thing to come in and tell somebody like your biggest insecurity, and I think that that's part of what makes people closed off at times. But, and I want them to feel comfortable, because it's a scary thing going into cosmetic surgery, and let alone having it be the one thing that's in the center of your face that everyone's going to see from here to eternity, So, yeah, I just think that that's a big part of it is making people feel comfortable, and really explaining things to them, because, I'm the type of person that anything I go into, I need to know all of the details. I don't like to have any sort of unplanned events come up. And so I treat patients just like I am myself, which is, if I went to a cardiologist, I'm not a cardiologist. Yeah, I know something about it because I'm a doctor, but I want to know all the details of what's going to happen in that treatment. I think a lot of times doctors sort of gloss over that stuff. But you know, I take the time and I pull out textbooks and I show them like what I'm going to be doing and how I change the structure and that kind of thing. And I think that really puts people at ease too. And I think that, yeah, it's just an important part of it for me too.
Absolutely. My daughter, when she was young, I think she was probably under 10. She got bit in the face by a dog, and it was just across her cheek.
Yep.
And we did surgery. We went with sick. We went to didn't go to Sick Kids Hospital. I'm from Canada in Toronto, and but went, and the doctor was really good explaining what they're going to do and how they're going to do it, but really lousy at giving us any identity to the relationship to who we are and why we matter.
Yeah.
And that's the very essence of what we, in our leadership course, we talk about. Every organization has three spaces: the transactional, what we do and how we do it, which is what the medical community is trained on. And we want you guys to be really good at that. And then, but the relational space, which is who we are and why we matter, that's not as important. And it technically isn't, but it does come down to, at some point in your case, where it's critical. Otherwise people just are going to say no. But when those two spaces are working well together, then the creative space comes over where I can see the vision for myself, and when they're not working, then that's where we have the conflict in the organization, blah, blah, blah. So I love how you approach that. And I would imagine in your organization, as far as how you work with your team, you're probably very much about empowering your team and very much about casting vision with them and celebrating the wins and making them part of the journey of the relationship with the clients, the patients, I guess would be the term, not simply just task doers related to the.
100%. In fact, I mean, the people that I work with, so my nurse who's in the operating room with me, she's been with me for about 10 years. My practice manager, she's been with me since I opened my own practice. I built an office here in New York City. I have my operating room on site here in my office, and she's been with me since I opened the office. And I only work with people who feel like family to me. It's just, first of all, it's difficult to come into work, and not be around people that you really like. But then also when you're doing something stressful, which it is, I mean, as surgeons, we put a lot of pressure on ourselves. We want people to be happy. We want to get good results. We don't want people to be unhappy. So, believe it or not, there's, I put a lot of pressure on myself, and the easiest way to work, of course, is with people who, care about you care about them. And because we're so tight knit, I think that comes across to the patients. For one thing, it puts them even more at ease. In fact, I can't tell you how many of my patients come to me after surgery and say, your whole staff was just the greatest, from the get-go. And it's like, I appreciate that so much, but I know it, I know it because I know who they are. I know the type of people they are. And so, yes, it's just such a great team effort. And we, all sort of feel those wins together when, someone has a great experience and tells us about it. And hopefully most people do. I think they do. Yeah. So
it just caused me to think, I think the great learning side of this would be that if you've having been in a palliative care facility with my mom passed, my dad, different things. And in every case, anytime I've been in and in professional capacity too, you just come away the level of empathy and genuine care is just so incredible. Well, there's a bit of secret sauce in there. It doesn't just happen. It's right. A function of both the hirings. It's a function of putting the right personality types together and understanding each other and be able to meet each other where they're at, and then having this genuine care for people that is exceptionally high, but at the same time, you still got to execute the tasks, the jobs, and do it. That's right. Using your word, what was the word? Exquisite. Exquisite. So let me ask you another question here. Let's. Sure. So, what are some of the trends or developments that you think will shape the future of your industry?
That is an excellent question. I mean, I would say, so a couple of things. I mean, first of all, there are actually some techniques that have changed over the years. I'm just trying to think of how to organize it best. So in terms of techniques, there's one development, and this is really interesting, and hopefully I can explain it to you as a layperson who doesn't perform the surgery, but the sort of the typical approach to rhinoplasty, literally for as long as, you know, I can remember, was if you picture a nose that's too large, right? And you've got to make it smaller. So you're kind of taking off the top of the nose. I mean, that's exactly what has been done. And you're shaving down bone, cartilage, and then you kind of have to put all that back together. Okay. So and that's called a structural approach to rhinoplasty, because you're taking apart the structure and putting it back together. So about 5 or 6 years ago, maybe 7 years ago now, a different technique called preservation rhinoplasty became, well, it was sort of introduced back then, and I was one of the first people in the United States actually to learn the technique. And I went to the people who developed it are in Europe and Turkey, and I went and learned from them this technique. And it's interesting because when things are done, you know, a certain way in the United States for so long, it changes, you know, doctors are very reluctant to change the way they do things, right? Or hesitant. And so what preservation does essentially is it preserves the entire top of the nose. So you're not making it smaller by cutting off the top. What you do is you're sort of taking bone and cartilage from underneath inside the nose, and then you can push the whole top of the nose back into the face to straighten the dorsum. And the benefit of that is that a lot of people actually have a beautiful dorsum. The nose is just too large. Okay. So you want to maintain that. But if you are shaving it and, you know, getting rid of it, then you've got to put it back together. And it's very difficult to put it back together in a way that's just as natural as the way God made it, if you will, you know? So that's one big thing that's kind of changed. And like I said, I mean, I was one of the first people to start doing that about 6 years ago, brought it back here. And even I'd say for probably the first 3-4 years of that time, nobody in the States still wanted to even touch it because they thought it just too different. It wasn't going to work, that kind of thing. And now all of a sudden it's, you know, it's a huge thing. And every rhinoplasty surgeon out there pretty much is trying to learn this technique. So that's one technique that's changed. The other thing that's really changed is sort of, you know, technological advancements, if you will. So the way we typically cut bones and, you know, shave bones has been with old-fashioned instruments, if you will. We literally use a rasp, which is like a file, a bone file. You can file down the bones with that. And then to cut the bones, we use a hammer and a chisel, believe it or not. Very sharp chisel and a hammer, and you know, hit the chisel and it cuts through the bone. The downside to using those instruments, especially the hammer and the chisel, is that, you know, nasal bones are very thin, delicate. And so you can imagine when you're hitting a metal object through it, you can inadvertently fracture, chip the bones. You know, the cuts are sort of less precise. So one of the newer technologies that's come about is this thing called piezo, P-I-E-Z-O. And it's ultrasonic technology. And so it's basically like this little instrument. It has a little blade on it and it vibrates like at ultrasonic frequencies. And so it cuts the bones and shapes the bones, sculpts the bones with the utmost precision. You can't damage the bone if you wanted to, unless you just made a cut where you didn't, you know, somewhere where you weren't supposed to. And so that has made a huge impact on recovery times in the field. So, you know, you probably see somebody on YouTube who's, you know, just got their splint on their nose after the rhinoplasty. They look like they've been in a car accident, you know, black and blue and swollen. And now that doesn't happen basically anymore with the use of these kinds of instruments. So those are two huge things that have really changed. Then I'd say the one other thing that's sort of changing, although I haven't really completely caught on to it, we do a lot of imaging for patients, which is essentially just one-dimensional, morphing photos, that kind of thing. There are some people trying to do three-dimensional imaging, I don't think I haven't found it super useful in my practice. I think it's a little bit more of a gimmick, if you will. I think that by showing somebody a picture, a photo of what they look like is sufficient, and it adds an expense to the whole thing. And I don't think it provides much additional information for the patient. So, but those I'd say are the sort of big things that have changed in the field, or, sort of advanced it. Because aside from those things, literally, I'd say it's been pretty much the same for decades. It's not, it's changed very much.
Interesting. That's yeah, you hear the hammer and chisel, that of course gets my attention.
Yeah. But believe it or not, and that obviously it sounds interesting, but if you can believe it, the approach, the structural versus the preservation, that's actually the bigger thing. Like if you're a rhinoplasty surgeon, you're kind of like, wow, that's a completely different approach. Never did this operation in the past.
Yeah, it's hard to stick some back on the top of that nose if you went too far.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
I get the I was thinking about with the with clients, you're talking about the imaging. I've seen in the dental side of things, they have, I was just saw it just in a podcast just a little while ago we're doing, and it was on just really what was happening was that they, they would take a picture and they would you'd see the person's mouth, and they wanted to have some teeth straightened, whitening, and some caps. And basically, and they were utilizing an AI platform, and they showed what you're going to look like with this result. And of course, in real time, you're sitting in the doctor's chair, or you're at the doctor's office, and say, does that give you more confidence, or does that worry? And they, does it take out that anxiety a little bit, or is it easier to make a decision quickly? And that kind of leads me to the question I wanted to ask you, which was, how do you help a possible client make a decision?
That's a great question, because the answer is I don't really. I am the type of person that I don't like to force anything on anybody. I don't like to suggest other things. I think that a lot of surgeons, for example, will, if you come in and you want your nose done, might say like, well, you could really use your eyes or your chin or this or that. I don't like to point out additional things to people that they don't already have an issue with themselves, because I think all that does is potentially breed more insecurity for them, and if they don't have the financial means, or whatever the case may be, or just aren't in the mindset to want to have that sort of operation, then they go on thinking, oh, well, this doctor just said that this is wrong, and so now I've got to think about this, you know what I mean? So the reason for me saying that is that, you asked, like, basically, how did you phrase it exactly? Like, how do I
Help them make a decision.
help them make a decision? I think that, first of all, people have come in, they've already made the decision. They know they want this operation done. So there's really no need for certainly encouragement on it. And I wouldn't do that anyway, because it wouldn't really be ethical to sort of promote somebody doing something. But I think what I was saying before about my approach with explaining things, like, I think that people really want to understand what's going to happen to them, and if they do, it also takes some of that fear factor away for them, so my approach is just explain, make it super clear so that they feel as comfortable as they can, encourage them to ask questions, and then just make sure that we're on the same page, and I think if we are, then it happens, and usually pretty seamlessly. So, but yeah, I don't like to necessarily encourage anybody, you know what I mean? Because that's a decision for them to make.
Yeah, it's kind of like makes sense. I mean, you don't want to be part of the decision, but you want to help them have the information.
That's right.
And the confidence to make a decision.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Yeah. That's what I mean. Yeah. So just watching our time, and I have a question that it's probably my most my favorite question. I ask it in any podcast because I'm always intrigued to hear how people keep learning and growing.
Yeah.
And to that point, there's the question I want to I'm going to put it in two parts. Like, how do you continue to grow and learn in your field, and how do you stay motivated and inspired in your work?
Yep. So I'll start with how do I continue to grow, and then you might have to remind me the second part. Couple things. I mean, number one, there's lots of different ways. I mean, there are meetings that we have, national meetings with plastic surgeons, things, attending those certainly helps. For me, I would say the biggest thing that has helped me grow is traveling and seeing other certain nose surgeons that I respect, like have the utmost respect for in different parts of the world. Because I just told you, I learned this whole, preservation notion from some guys in Turkey and Europe. And so, that's been the greatest thing for me. Because to be honest with you, and you can read books, which of course I do. You can watch videos, which I do. You can attend meetings, but really being there while someone else is performing surgery is the best way to learn. And what's interesting is that, once you're out of training, that stuff doesn't really exist anymore. I don't go down the street to my competitor and say, hey, can I watch you in the operating room? And vice versa for obvious reasons. But being able to sort of travel abroad and learn from these guys that have pioneered some of these new techniques has been, I've been super grateful to them, and it's changed my practice in that it's just sort of elevated my game even more. Because like I said, I mean, I want every result to be the best it can possibly be. And so how do you do that? You learn the best techniques and try and implement those. What was the second part of that question?
And the second part, and we're gonna wrap up with this one. This is a great ending. So how do you stay motivated and inspired? I always like to say motivated and inspired because motivation tends to come from the head, and that's those fleeting moments of fun and joy. But inspired's really come from the heart, that joy, what you've already shared with us, with that inculcated passion you have for making a difference, just what you're describing with other there's a culture that you guys have that is unique in how you perceive other people and perceive your place in those relationships with those people. But so when I say, how do you stay motivated and inspired in your work, that's where I'm kind of coming from.
It's super easy. I'll tell you why, because so for me, again, it's art, right? I mean, like I said, always drawing, oil painting, all that stuff. This is literally like going to an art studio for me. You know what I mean? Every day that I get to operate, I'm doing artwork, and it's something I love. I absolutely love to do it. So I don't need motivation because I just love what I'm doing, physically love what I'm doing. And it's just always a challenge. I'm always trying to do better each time and make an exquisite nose. So that sort of what's the word, motivates me. And then again, the result on the other end of it, right? So once you see that patient post-op and you see the reaction that they give, I mean, it's the best thing in the world. So literally, I find myself very lucky. I mean, my wife and I talk about this all the time, how not many people, I think, are necessarily love what they do when they work.
So the second part of the question
Right.
was, how do you stay motivated and inspired in your work?
Yep. So for me, doesn't really require any motivation. And the reason for that is because I love what I do. I think that if you don't love what you do, you have to come up with ways to keep motivated, right? Obviously, it's like working out in the gym. Who likes going to the gym? Not me. Some people do, but I want to be healthy, all that stuff. And so I kind of get in that mindset and I figure out a way to get there. But with what I do, I absolutely love it. I mean, for me, it's I don't get to draw and oil paint anymore. I've got 2 little kids, lots of things I like to do outside of the office. And so I don't really have that time to devote, because when I sit in front of a piece of art that I'm creating, it takes me forever, because I'm making every detail perfect. So I can't devote that kind of time. So this is my art now. I mean, I'm sculpting every time I do an operation. And nothing gives me more satisfaction than creating a beautiful, beautiful piece of art. It's as simple as that. It sounds cliche, maybe even sounds silly, I don't know, but it's the God's honest truth. So I love it so much, enjoy every operation. In fact, it's the only thing in medicine that really, I'm passionate about is operating. And so, yeah, no motivation required. And then of course, when you see the reactions afterwards, in the post-operative period, and then you get that, it's just the most amazing feeling to see somebody transformed, not aesthetically or physically transformed, but emotionally transformed. That joy, the tears, the hugs. I mean, there's no better feeling in the world. So
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, we're in a time where hope has to take different forms than what it traditionally has. And you've kind of described a wonderful way for people to experience that for themselves in a way that kind of gives them a fresh, if you will, a fresh start on how they see themselves and how they value themselves and why they matter. So it's beautiful.
absolutely, absolutely.
So I want to thank you for your time today, Dr. Cangello. This has been as enjoyable as informing for me. It always is. And I thank you for taking the time to talk about your journey. I want to remind our listeners that you can access Dr. Cangello's website at www.cangello. I'll spell that and then I'll do it again. CANGELLO plasticsurgery.com. So Cangello plasticsurgery.com. And you can see what he's talking about. You can see where his passion comes from. I also want to take a moment to thank our listeners. We appreciate every one of you. Big thank you also goes out to our sponsors, Equa Marketing, who are experts in digital marketing for aesthetic practices. Don't forget to make use of their offer I mentioned at the outset for a free digital marketing consultation by heading over to www.businessofesthetics.org/MSM. If you like our podcast, please share with your friends and colleagues, and don't forget to leave us a review. We love reviews. We all love reviews. They are a big deal these days, so please do so. Thank you again for all of you. Wish you an amazing week ahead, and until next time, Mike Walker signing off.
Thank you for joining us this week on the Business of Aesthetic podcast series, brought to you by our gold sponsor, Equa Marketing. Would you like to join our growing group of aesthetic industry experts and get featured on the Business of Aesthetics podcast? Or do you know someone who would love to share their strategies for growth in the aesthetic business, providing quality patient care, or their clinical expertise? Head over to www.businessofesthetics.org podcast show and apply to be featured as a guest on the show. Remember to subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Amazon Music, or wherever you listen. If you would like to engage with today's speakers or any of our past speakers, join our Facebook group or LinkedIn group by searching for Business of Aesthetics. Thank you, and have a great day.